Hi, and welcome to Power Play. I'm Mike LeCouture. Tonight, the day after the big deal.
It has no root. It has no funding. There is no company that is advocating for it.
We're absolutely unified. There's all kinds of room for different opinions in our caucus.
So how's the Liberal caucus reacting to the big shift in the party's climate policy? And what about Stephen Guilbeault's exit from cabinet? We'll bring in caucus chair James Maloney in just moments. And then we're going to head west to BC and talk to that province's energy minister, Adrian Dix. Is BC still dug in on opposing a new pipeline? Then, developing Canada's north.
Very important infrastructure investments in the Northwest Territories that we're working through.
I can tell that this government is focused on the North, cares about the North.
The Premier of the Northwest Territories is in Ottawa asking for support on major projects. We'll speak to RJ Simpson after he met with the Prime Minister, Mark Carney. So how did that meeting go? Well, we're going to put that question to him in just minutes. Plus, le grand débat. NDP leadership hopefuls faced off in Quebec en français. It was supposed to be all in French, and, well, some of it was. Our front bench will size up the field. Today we have Sabrina Grover, Melanie Paradis, and the person who was the moderator of that debate, Carl Boulanger. First, though,
He's dedicated his life to climate issues, and it's completely understandable that he would stand on that principle. Does that mean that there's a cancer spreading through the caucus? Absolutely not.
The discussions that we're having are cordial, are respectful, but they're very open. And we welcome that, and our colleagues welcome that. And Prime Minister Carney and Prime Minister Trudeau, both of them encourage those open discussions.
He's a member of the Liberal caucus. I think one of the things that this shows, again, is that the Liberal Party is the one party in Canada where you're allowed to have a diversity of views. And our caucus has a diversity of views, and I think that's a strength.
they're all one big happy family, or at least that's the impression the Liberals are trying to give today. Many of them are pushing back against questions over party unity after Stephen Guilbeault resigned from cabinet. It came just hours after the federal government and the Alberta government revealed the pathway to a deal on energy. It also paves the way for a pipeline. Guilbeault is a longtime environmentalist. He also served as the environment minister under Justin Trudeau. But he said he can no longer remain in cabinet after seeing elements of the climate action plan that he worked on being dismantled. Guilbeault will stay on as a Liberal MP. As for the deal that prompted his resignation, the Carney government has agreed to suspend the clean electricity regulations in Alberta and not implement the oil and gas emissions cap. All that while Alberta says it will work on increasing its industrial price on carbon. It's all a significant shift away from the last decade of the Liberal climate policy. So how is it really going over in caucus? Well, James Maloney is the Liberal caucus chair, and he joins us right now. Welcome to Power Play.
Thanks very much, Mike. Glad to be here.
We just heard from a number of members of your caucus. They were speaking about how it's a big tent party. But I wanted to ask you, how big of a shock was this to you when you heard that he resigned?
It was disappointing. Look, Stephen's been a valuable member of our caucus and a valuable member of the cabinet since 2019 when he was elected. I'm disappointed to see him go. But look, don't lose sight of the fact he's not leaving caucus. He stepped down from cabinet, so he's still going to be a very constructive voice in caucus, and I look forward to continuing to work with him.
A constructive voice in caucus, but what does this do to the caucus dynamic? You're in charge of really making sure that there is peace and harmony inside caucus, but when you consider what he said in his post and how he was watching this policy be dismantled, what does that do to caucus the harmony, I should say, within caucus?
I don't think it does anything negative to caucus harmony, honestly. Cabinet and caucus are two different things. He's still going to be in caucus. I look forward to working with him. And, my colleagues that you aired their comments before I came on, they said it very well. We have a very united caucus. I mean, people have been asking me for days, how do you feel about this caucus problem? Do you have a caucus problem? The answer is no, and it's a hard no. We really don't. Look, we have a big, diverse group of people from a big, diverse country, and I've been an MP for 10 years now, and this is no different than any other discussion we've had. I mean, people have different opinions, and that's what caucus is for. So the problem that people, some people want to exist, frankly, because they're trying to, it makes it look sexy, I guess, but there's really no problem. I mean, caucus is united. I can say that hand on heart.
But are you saying that the journalists who are asking those questions of you, and they're saying that they're hearing that, you're saying they're making that up?
I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying there is different opinions on issues, but I think people are trying to translate into something that it's not, which is caucus disunity, because that does not exist. I can assure you of that. Look, as I said, I've been there for 10 years. There have been lots of times when I've disagreed with some of the things that the government of the day might have been doing, and I've expressed that opinion, but we have a way of working it out in caucus and coming out united. And that's not to say we have anything to work out here. We really don't. Caucus is truly united. I came out of the meeting on Wednesday, with 169 of my colleagues, and people were all on the same page. I mean, there's discussions going on. And on Wednesday, look, I mean, we hadn't seen the MOU at that point. The MOU came out yesterday, and I've read it a couple times thoroughly now, and I think that there was a lot of discussion around a narrative that hadn't been properly defined yet.
But at the same time, we do know that members of the BC caucus from your Liberals, they were briefed on that MOU prior to yesterday's announcement. How would you describe their feeling about this deal?
I have not spoken individually with all of the BC caucus, my BC caucus colleagues. I have spoken with several of them, and I've seen them in our national caucus meetings, and I've seen them in other discussions. It's closer to home for them, but again, this is anything you're hearing in the media or stories that are spoken of. There's no caucus disunity. I mean, it's an issue closer to home for them than it is for me here in Ontario, but it's an important national issue. I don't think any of this can or should be translated into something that it's not, which is a problem in caucus, because there isn't one. There really isn't one.
Do you agree that this will be, as you had sort of mentioned, it's closer to home for those BC Liberals? Do you agree that it'll be tougher for them to try and go back into their ridings and explain to their people why there's been such a dramatic shift in climate policy by the Liberal government?
Well, let's start at the tail end of that question. I don't know that there has been a dramatic shift, first of all. This is a memorandum of understanding about setting the groundwork for future dialogue with Alberta and British Columbia and Indigenous communities. So they will have to go back to their constituencies and talk to their constituents about it, yes, but I think now that the MOU is out there and it's in the public, and you've heard from both premiers, and you've heard from the Prime Minister, and you've heard from others, I think people will understand it better. And if you read the agreement, I don't think it's going to be a challenge for them to, explain to their constituents what's going on.
Respectfully, Mr. Guilbeault said that some of the measures that remained essential to the Liberal climate plan are being dismantled. He noted the consumer carbon price, oil and gas sector emissions cap, clean electricity regulations. So I guess I just want to ask you again, is that not clear in how those were key to Mr. Guilbeault, and he felt that those were key planks to the Liberal climate policy. So how can you say that that is not a dramatic change?
Well, I would disagree with him on his interpretation of what the MOU says. I don't think it's a dismantling in any way, shape, or form. I think it sets out a clear path for a dialogue between the Canadian government and the Alberta government about how to address some of these issues. And I think that's positive, I think it's constructive, and I think it's responsible. And I think that's what you saw reflected in the comments of the Prime Minister afterwards, and I think that's what you saw reflected in the comments of the Premier of Alberta. Stephen has a different interpretation of that, but we'll continue to talk to him about that, and that's you'd have to ask him about that. But I don't think it's a dismantling at all.
but you're taking away the emissions cap, also the consumer carbon tax, that's gone. I mean, some would say if a Conservative Prime Minister did this, that your party would be extremely critical of these moves. So I guess my question is the Liberal Party still a champion of the environment?
Question to answer. It's a hard yes. The consumer carbon tax was removed before yesterday, and if you look at the MOU, there's target dates when some of these issues have to be addressed. April 1st being the significant date. So nothing has been dismantled. It's just created a framework and a time frame to address some of these issues on a
But there's a pathway to it, Mr. Maloney. With respect, there's a pathway to it, and the words of dismantling and doing away with those are Stephen Guilbeault's words. Those are not mine.
Well, okay, but as I said, I disagree with the interpretation of the MOU. I don't see it as a dismantling at all. I see this as a positive, constructive approach to, with one level of government dealing with another level of government. There's been for a long time, as long as I can remember, as long as you can remember, Mike, people like to talk about tensions between the Alberta government and the federal government. This is a responsible agreement between the two levels of government to create a framework and a structure to have these discussions in the way that they should be and in a responsible way. That's all this is. It's not a dismantling of anything.
Okay. Unfortunately, we're all out of time, Mr. Maloney. I do appreciate you coming on the show. Liberal Caucus Chair James Maloney, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure, anytime.
Now, there's been plenty of reaction to the deal between Alberta and Ottawa, especially in BC. The NDP government in that province continues to oppose the deal that could see a pipeline go to the western coast of Canada.
Our anxiety remains about this proposed pipeline from Alberta, that project, even on the most optimistic take, is many, many, many years away. It has no route. It has no funding. There is no company that is advocating for it. And it is solely at this point a communications exercise from the province of Alberta.
BC Premier David Eby meeting with the federal energy minister Tim Hodgson at this hour. There's a lot riding on that meeting, so joining me right now to talk about it is Adrian Dix. He's BC's Minister of Energy and Climate Solutions. Welcome back to Power Play.
Hey, good afternoon, Mike.
So Minister Hodgson did mention yesterday he would be meeting with you yesterday as well. So I wanted to ask you, following that meeting, do you feel any differently about this MOU and about the project?
Well, the meeting gave us an opportunity, and Mr. Hodgson came to British Columbia and he met with me in my hometown. So all respect for that. And it gave me the opportunity to communicate our strong view on this question. But, I'd say to your audience, having listened to the previous interview, that the MOU exists in time and space. People can read it, read what it says very clearly, are the obligations taken on by both governments. The most important one for us on a project that, as the Premier said, as I came on, no proponent, no route, no money, and there's not a possibility at this fairly outlandish price that would be required that you'd have the kind of take-or-pay contracts that would be provided by people who would want to use the pipeline. No possibility of that. It would require a massive public subsidy. So in effect, one of the most important provisions of this agreement from our perspective is the one that says it won't be publicly subsidized, although whether that will be maintained throughout is open to question, and whether there'll be a public subsidy around the Pathways project is open to question. But what that tells you is we're spending a lot of time here and a lot of energy and massive changes to policies that don't just affect Alberta, but it affect British Columbia and all the other provinces for a project that doesn't exist. We in BC, we got projects that exist, and we've got many of them. The North Coast Transmission Line, which is our project, which is a major national project, will open up $50 billion worth of mining projects. We've had 300 meetings with First Nations on that project, 300. And we are moving ahead. We're going to have shovels in the ground next year. That's a real project. And in this case, frankly, the First Nations most affected, the coastal First Nations, but many others are, found out about it in a leaked article in the Globe and Mail. So I don't think that's the best way to do business, in my view. In any event, this is a project that isn't going ahead, but the fact of the project and the changes has an impact. It has an impact on all the social license required to do the tens of billions of dollars in projects we are doing, one. And two, it's significantly distracting. I've done more interviews this week, probably with CTV, than than on all of the major projects that are actual projects that we're doing in British Columbia.
And we do appreciate you coming on, but I wanted to address a couple of things you said in there. First of all, about Premier Eby's comments saying no proponent, no route, no money, no First Nations support. So I guess why are you so worried about it if you say that there's all of these reasons why it shouldn't happen? Why are you so concerned that it will happen then?
Well, 3 points. One, what we're talking about is lifting a tanker ban on the coast, which is important for the development of projects like LNG Canada 2, like Silicium's LNG, like dozens of mining projects.
With respect, Minister, with respect, Minister, according to the MOU, that only happens after a number of other hurdles have been passed and a number of other things have been put in place, even a proponent. So, that tanker ban on the Northwest Coast, that is the last step.
But Mike, there is a commitment, an undertaking by the federal government with respect to these issues. And you just discussed that in your previous interview. There are undertakings to make a series of decisions that are economic and public policy matters. Clean energy regulations, for example. Well, we meet the Clean Energy Act because we made investments to meet the Clean Energy Act. And now our neighbor is getting an exemption from that. And this was not talked to us about. But I would say, just broadly speaking, the tanker ban is important to us. It's a significant issue for coastal First Nations. And if you don't think they think it's important, you haven't talked to coastal First Nations, because they've made their position very clear. And we have done extraordinary things on the coast with real projects like LNG Canada 1, the largest private sector investment in Canada, benefits Alberta as well as British Columbia. LNG Canada 2 will equal that. But projects in the port, our clean electricity plan, billions of dollars of clean electricity projects across our province. These all require work with First Nations and with others to make sure that they go ahead. So this is significant for us for that reason. But as I noted to you, all of the provisions in this MOU and the specific undertakings of the federal government that will occur in the next 6 months took place, many of which affect British Columbia directly, we weren't involved in. And that's not, there's a tendency to think, well, that's after the fact complaining. Can you imagine what would happen if Premier Eby and Premier Canoe and the Prime Minister and Premier Ford sat down and discussed about something in Edmonton and Calgary without the Alberta government's presence? What do you think their reaction would be, Mike?
I take your point. I wanted to ask you specifically about the tanker ban, but more specifically about the route. And the reason I say that is because there's already a Trans Mountain pipeline. So what if a proponent came along and decided that they wanted the pipeline, instead of going to the Northwest Coast, instead to go to Burnaby? Would BC be open to that?
Well, Mike, here's the distinction, right? There is, most pipeline expansion projects now are what are called optimization projects. They get more oil through an existing pipeline. And there is just such a proposal on Trans Mountain, which would cost a fraction of the cost of this, on a pipeline which is currently owned by the government of Canada, that, by the way, they can't sell because it's not worth what it costs to build it, by about $18 billion. So there are cheaper alternatives. You are absolutely correct. There are dramatically cheaper alternatives here. And the federal government and the Alberta government have rejected those alternatives, and they're going for a northern route. I didn't create the northern route here. This is their proposal, right? And so I can only comment on their suggestions. And right now, their proposal is essentially a press release, but their proposal is to take a northern route across northern British Columbia.
And I understand that was their proposal, but that route is not set in stone. And I don't think the MOU, and I know, as a matter of fact, the MOU does not spell out a route. So that's why I'm asking, with what we're expecting, the increased capacity possibly to be in that other pipeline, if this next pipeline, a new pipeline, was to go to Burnaby, would you be completely against that?
But Mike, what we've said is, there is a pipeline. We just built one. It just finished. We just paid $34 billion. You paid for it. I paid for it. Everyone listening to us paid for it, right? We built this pipeline. It's currently not full. It's about 82 to 85% full, depending on the month. In addition to that, you could add hundreds of thousands of barrels per day without building a new pipeline. And there's about $1.1 billion in barrels per day available in what I call optimization projects that are a fraction of the cost of this. The fact is, we in BC, and this is where we want the focus to be, and this was my message to Minister Hodgson last night, there are real projects here. So I know a lot of time gets spent on this, and they've been focused on this, and they've made this massive change in their approach to things to get an MOU, not a project, but an MOU. But what we expect is focus on the North Coast transmission line, on mines in BC, on projects like LNG Canada 2, so we get those across the line. Because unlike this project, those projects are going to make Canadians wealthier, support healthcare, support education, and support jobs into the future. That's the difference between what we're doing and what this is.
Okay, Minister, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. I do appreciate you taking the time today, though. Adrian Dix, BC's Minister of Energy and Climate Solutions. Thanks for being with us.
Great to be on the show.
Thanks again. We'll see you soon. The Front Bench with Sabrina Grover, Melanie Paradis, and Carl Boulanger will be here to talk more about the political fallout of that MOU between Alberta and Ottawa, as well as that resignation of Stephen Guilbeault. Before that, though, we're going to go one-on-one with the Premier of the Northwest Territories, R.J. Simpson. He just wrapped up a meeting with Prime Minister Mark Carney. So was he able to make any progress on the major projects that he'd like to see in the North? We'll ask him right after this.
Very important infrastructure investments in the Northwest Territories that we're working through, everything from support for critical minerals, the Slave Geological Corridor, important for diversification, to trade corridors.
I can tell that this government is focused on the North, cares about the North. I see it reflected from the first conversations that we've had. I've seen that reflected in your actions. I've seen that reflected in the budget. And it's an exciting time to be the Premier of the Northwest Territories right now because there's a lot of attention on the North and I can see that investment happening.
It was kind of the usual photo op with pleasantries just ahead of that meeting between Northwest Territories Premier R.J. Simpson and Prime Minister Mark Carney. Now, every Premier has been pitching investment projects for the federal government to give them support with the Major Projects Office. So, how did that meeting go? And is Simpson leaving with any deals? Well, the Premier joins us right now in studio. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
So I wanted to start on this critical highway that I know that is important for you, the Mackenzie Valley Highway, to connect different communities, north and south. Did the Prime Minister say that he's willing to work with you on that?
He did, and he's been saying that for quite a while now. The Mackenzie Valley Highway, it would connect our two forward operating locations for the Canadian Armed Forces, Inuvik up in the near the Arctic coast with Yellowknife. It would also connect a number of communities, ensuring there's a safe resupply and affordable resupply to those communities, which don't have a road right now. And it will also open up a lot of economic opportunities. There's oil and gas, there's critical minerals on that route. So it's something that's been talked about for decades, and this government finally seems to be providing the support that we've always hoped for.
Now, I know it's not part of the Major Projects Office. It hasn't sort of been given that designation. However, there is the Arctic Economic and Security Corridor, which was given money in this last budget. It's also on the list of transformative strategies. Tell me how important that is, given the fact that budget 2025-26 was given, if I'm not mistaken, $1 billion over 4 years.
Yeah, so the Arctic Economic and Security Corridor, it's not one of the projects that is officially listed with the Major Projects Office, but nonetheless, we're working with the Major Projects Office. I think Ottawa recognizes we're a small territory. There's only 45,000 people in the territory, and we don't necessarily have the capacity to advance these things on our own. And so Ottawa's been a great partner, and we're working with them on that and all of our major projects, actually.
There's actually a lot of critical mineral projects that I know you'd like to see some movement on as well. I assume you spoke to the Prime Minister about that. Are you concerned that it's not getting enough federal attention when you look at the environment right now, and there's been a lot of oxygen taken up by this MOU between Alberta and Ottawa? I'm
not concerned at all. So we might not be the jurisdiction that's in the headlines about these things, but behind the scenes, we're working closely with the feds, and they have been very, very supportive. I've never seen this type of support before in my time in politics, and so I feel very comfortable, even though we might not be on a list, we are getting the support that we need.
I asked that because Premier David Eby had said yesterday, after that MOU was signed, that he was worried that the pipeline project could be called an energy vampire, drawing out resources away from, quote, the real projects that will employ people. Do you share that concern?
I mean, I don't want to get too much into the whole pipeline debate, but if we want to build things in this country, we have to have dialogue. We have to look at the pros and the cons and really hash these things out. And so I think that's the work that BC, Alberta, and Canada has in front of them if they want to advance something like that.
On that, though, because I know this is massive as well in your territories, having Indigenous buy-in. How important is that? And again, I'm not going to get you to sort of weigh into any pipeline politics, but that is at the heart of this pipeline as well, is making sure that there is buy-in. Do you have any advice for fellow premiers in making sure that they get that buy-in before going forward with any kind of project?
It's essential. I mean, in the territory, we have a resource regime, regulatory regime that incorporates Indigenous rights into the regime itself. So we have a co-management regime with Indigenous governments. And so they have a say in projects right from the very beginning. And I always say that Indigenous participation doesn't slow projects down, it accelerates them. If you want to put up a roadblock, have no Indigenous participation. Wait till the end to go out and consult them. But if you want to get things moving, consult early, go out, offer opportunities for economic partnerships. So yeah, I think that it's essential, and the Prime Minister has said this time and time again as well that it is essential if we want to get these big projects moved forward.
So how do you feel when you see that step, not to say gets skipped, but certainly isn't given the utmost consideration?
Well, I think that in the territory, we're an Indigenous territory. Our majority of our population is Indigenous, so we do this anyways. Yeah. And you see the rest of Canada slowly catching up. And so if people are skipping that step now, they're going to learn that hard lesson that they can't do that. And they're going to ensure next time they do it. So I think that we're moving in the right direction. But there's always work to be done.
Natural gas, another big resource in Northwest Territories. How much of a resource is there? And I know you had said that it's different in Northwest Territories in getting the federal backing, but I know you've also spoken about making sure not only that the Northwest Territories it becomes essentially fuel sufficient or self-sufficient, but also you'd like to see export from Northwest Territories. How close are you to doing that?
Well, there's significant gas reserves in the Northwest Territories, specifically up in the Beaufort Delta in the Arctic Ocean. Right now, there is a moratorium on oil and gas development and exploration in the Arctic Ocean. If that gets lifted, I think that's really going to open things up because the big companies will see, okay, we have the significant onshore resources and we have the offshore resources. Now it's a place that is worth making investments. And it's actually pretty close to the Asian markets as well, so things can be exported. So it's on Indigenous land, and they are directing how this is going to play out, but there's a plan to first use that to power the communities, ensure that we can bring costs down in the territory. And once we do that, then we can look at exporting.
And in terms of that moratorium, and what are those conversations like to make sure that gets lifted?
Well, right now the moratorium is set to be lifted or reviewed, I guess, in 2028. But
and potentially expire, right? I mean, is there anything you can do? Have you been able to have those conversations to make the case for it, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I just came from a meeting with the Prime Minister, and I made the case to the Prime Minister there, and now we're only one party. As I said before, this is on Inuvialuit land, and so it's really the Inuvialuit who are going to make that call. And if they want to see that lifted, I feel like by combining forces and working with the federal government, there's a possibility that we can see that happen.
Okay, I appreciate the time. Unfortunately, we are all out of time. R.J. Simpson, the Premier of the Northwest Territories, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. All right, time for a quick break. When we return, it's time for a Friday front bench. Premier Smith and Prime Minister Carney were all smiles yesterday as they agreed on a path to a pipeline, but also led to the exit of a minister. It's a Fallout Friday on this show, and we're going to break down all of that with Sabrina Grover, Melanie Paradis, and Carl Belanger. We'll be right back.
We actually have an agreement with the province of Alberta in a way that we haven't had before, a cooperation that we have not had before, to actually commit to environmental policies like the industrial carbon price and strengthening it, which has been a real point of contention, and also to work towards the clean electricity regulation and having an agreement with a pathway to getting to net zero by 2050 on their electrical grid. So when I look at the MOU as a whole, I think it's a really important step forward.
Environment Minister Julie de Bruijn in an interview airing this weekend on CTV's Question Period. Now, the last 36 hours in Canadian politics have given some people whiplash. After years of battles between Ottawa and Alberta, the two signed an agreement that could lead to a pipeline. You could also see the federal government abandon clean energy policies in exchange for Alberta negotiating an increased industrial carbon price. It did also lead to the resignation of a cabinet minister, though, longtime environmentalist Stephen Guilbeault quitting his post, but saying that he's going to stay on in the Liberal caucus. So what happens next? Let's bring in our front bench. Sabrina Grover was a federal Liberal candidate in the 2021 election. She's now senior advisor at North Star Public Affairs. Melanie Paradis is a former communications director to Aaron O'Toole. She's now the president of Texture Communications. And former interim NDP national director Carl Belanger. He's in studio with me here. He's also the president of Traction Strategies. Okay, Sabrina, I want to start with you on this one. Do you recognize the party that you once knew in the Liberals right now, given what we've seen in the last 36 hours?
You know, I said this earlier today, like I come from a province where we had 44 years of PC government. And every time you elected a new leader or a new premier, it shifted a little bit compared to what the last version of that party looked like. And I think that's what we're seeing here today, right? I think, number one, Mark Carney is a masterclass in redefining what the Liberals look like for 2025 and what it looks like going forward and the kind of country that he wants to see. And I think that the thing that I am most excited about with this MOU, and I know, there's a lot of things to talk about whether or not it's positive or not, but the fact that it actually moves energy policy from being an ideological battle between Liberals and Conservatives to being something that actually could be more practical and economic based. And I think that that is perhaps the struggle that Albertans have had over the last 10 years with Ottawa and with the government. So I think that Mark Carney's actually taken that step to make it more aligned with his principles and values, which is what does it do for the economy?
Melanie, it kind of struck me yesterday as how maybe both Conservatives and especially Conservatives in Alberta would have seen the first morning announcement as a huge win. And then they likely thought that the next announcement that came midway through the day was probably another win in the resignation of Stephen Guilbeault. Talk a little bit about not just that, but to Sabrina's point about this shift in the conversation around energy. What does this do to the Conservatives going forward?
Well, look, we are just moments away, I hope, from an announcement that we are going to get plastic straws back, because I think that's the last pillar to fall in Justin Trudeau's legacy is that ban with the departure of Stephen Guilbeault. It could all be ours. But look, I think what's been really interesting to me has been watching the reaction from Bay Street about the MOU. Yes, obviously, I agree with Sabrina that Mark Carney's trying to carve out his own niche. It does sound rather progressive conservative in some respects, but the response from Bay Street has been fascinating. There's been scathing commentary, a lot of skepticism that they don't believe that a private sector player will invest in a pipeline project, given the amount of opposition from BC and from the First Nations. So you have to wonder whether what Carney did with this MOU was actually just theater, or if he has a real plan, if there's anything in his pocket, to find a way to get BC and the First Nations on side quickly. Otherwise, none of this is going to result in anything.
Carl, do you think he wants them on side, I guess, to what Melanie is getting at?
Sure, he wants them on side, but I agree with her that...
Towards a pipeline, I mean.
Yeah, of course. But I think that Melanie is right, that this was a little bit of theater. Like I've said it last week, like this whole discussion is to put the problems that the federal have with Alberta on the shoulders of BC. That's where it's at. So this is why it was surprising to me that Stephen Guilbeault resigned. Because, I would have thought maybe the plastic straws would have been the last straw. but this memorandum is a pipeline on paper. It's not being built tomorrow. It's not being built next week, next month, next year. It's not happening anytime soon. So why did he choose that issue to trigger his resignation from cabinet? I'm puzzled by that. Furthermore, what's surprising is if it's such a question of principle, why is he still a Liberal? Why is he still going to support the Liberal in the House? Why is he still going to vote confidence in the Liberals? Those principles don't go that far. They stop at the cabinet doors.
Yeah.
That's very strange thing to me.
So, Sabrina, how do they square that? I mean, we saw James Maloney say, don't worry, we're all one big happy family. It's a huge tent. All opinions are welcome inside of it. But surely it doesn't really end with Guilbeault just stepping out of cabinet, does it?
I think it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I do think that Guilbeault obviously has a personal record and a personal identity tied to environment and climate, and execution of that in a certain way that doesn't jive with this version of government. I don't think that the Liberals have completely abandoned the idea of climate policy and of climate, and environmental policy. I think we will see more of that come out because, again, I think it's tied to the success of the economy. And I think that's what you're seeing with some of the carve-outs that Alberta has received in this MOU. From a caucus management perspective, I think that that's the biggest problem I would say Mark Carney is facing. It's not just that Guilbeault has stepped out, it's whether or not he can square that circle with the rest of the BC MPs and say, to this point, it is a pipeline on paper. It hasn't actually been developed. Now we need a proponent to come forward. And that's not the federal government's job. That's Alberta's job.
Mm-hmm. Melanie, you are someone that I know who has a bit of experience with leaders managing their caucus and how difficult that can be. What does the road ahead for Mark Carney look like here when you consider what Sabrina kind of just laid out?
Well, look, Stephen Guilbeault has been in Liberal caucus for just over 6 years. His pension just vested a few weeks ago, so this timing is very convenient for him. But you don't sit in caucus for that long or in cabinet for that long without having a fan club of sorts established around you. So I think that he must have friends in caucus and in cabinet who are going to be a bit sore about this and who are going to still want to carry on his torch. And that's going to cause divisions within Liberal caucus. It's going to continue to cause a lot of tension. I'm also fascinated to see who's going to replace him in his cabinet role in culture. When are we going to have a cabinet shuffle to fill that role? And what signal is Mark Carney going to send to Canadians by who he selects for that role?
Carl, last point to you for about 30 seconds, but especially on that it's not as if that there are no more progressives in that in that caucus as well. To Melanie's point, he had friends.
He had friends, he still has friends, and he's remained a member of that caucus, so he'll still talk to them. What will they do? I don't know. The Greens are looking for a new leader. The NDP is looking for a new leader. I don't know. Politics is a strange thing.
Yeah.
You never know what can happen next.
Okay, and speaking of the NDP needing a new leader, they also need somebody who's pretty good in French. Carl would know. He was the moderator of that debate yesterday. Whether or not Stephen Guilbeault is looking for a new job as a leader, unclear. But the potential next leader of the federal NDP did pitch their ideas on rebuilding the party yesterday. It was a French debate in Montreal, or I should say air quotes around French, because it was mostly French. How can the party move forward? Well, the front bench will be right back after this.
We're getting squeezed while billionaires are cashing in.
We need to approach this at all levels from every way we can, including a guaranteed livable basic income.
We need a fair tax system. We need to go after the offshore tax havens. I think we need a much more progressive income tax.
The cost of living is not an issue. It's an emergency. And it's an emergency caused by market failure.
When we elect more New Democrats, we get help for people. We get help for Canadians.
That was just a taste of last night's NDP leadership debate. We're not going to give you the whole thing because I'm told by Carl it's available on VHS for anybody who wants to watch the full thing. I kid, but candidates were out there, and those are the ones who want the party's top job facing off in a bilingual debate. Now, they laid out their visions of how they would rebuild the party that is sitting with just seven MPs and one that still doesn't have official party status in the House of Commons. So what did we learn from the debate? Well, let's bring back our front bench. Sabrina Grover, Melanie Paradis, and of course, Carl Belanger, as I mentioned, who moderated the debate. So let's start there. What do you think the NDP was able to accomplish with this debate and how people, got to know these candidates?
Well, Mike, it was for many the first introduction to some of these candidates. the objective was to have a debate 60% in French. I don't think we reached that threshold. They all struggled a bit with French, 3 more than the others. I think Avi Lewis and Ed McPherson are showing some kind of promises and ability. They did not use the simultaneous interpretation system, for instance. Okay. The others were basically reading or repeating memorized French sentences. So it made for some difficult exchanges at times. That said, the party is going through what's needed to be done. It's a leadership race. You have a debate. There was not much exchange of views or contrarian views. So they will need to do better if they want to break through the news. And yesterday was probably one of the worst days to have that debate because of what happened with Mr. Guilbeault. Yeah, a little MOU and the resignation.
That's right. Carl did talk about some of the difficulty they had in French. Just to bring everybody up to speed, let's play a little bit of it for you.
Ils ne vont pas ressusciter leur projet zombie ici au Québec.
Merci. Vous l'avez attendu. Mon français, c'est pas parfait.
Je sais que je dois continuer à travailler mon français.
Je vais apprendre le français parce que c'est important.
On est capable de bâtir un avenir lumineux, un avenir fier.
Merci, Monsieur McQuail.
You have to love the humility as well. Mel, I'm going to hand it to you. You got to take it from here on this one. Not only on their French, but how they can try and break through the noise.
So my mother, who's a retired French teacher and is watching today, I'm sorry you had to watch that. I'm certain that was a painful experience. But look, I actually think I've worked with a leader who was fully bilingual. Aaron O'Toole was fully bilingual when running for the leadership, but there was always this criticism about how good his French was that lasted truly until he was ousted, like 18 months later. And then he went on and now works for a company that was based in France. So look, there's hope. There's hope out there for people whose French needs a bit of improvement. I think that folks can learn it on the fly. Look, I was most interested in Rob Ashton and his performance, although obviously not the French part. I think he's a really interesting candidate, and he's speaking to affordability, to the working class, to bringing the NDP back to its roots. And he is such a great background as a dock worker. Like, I just think he's got a cool story. I would encourage more people like him to enter politics.
Sabrina, what was your takeaway from it, and what do you think that the NDP needs to do more, or any one of these candidates needs to do more to stand out? Because right now, it is a fairly wide field, expected to possibly narrow with some of these debates, or you will probably sort of see some of the leaders really sort of pull away probably here.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was an interesting choice to have that first debate in French in Quebec, because I wonder how much of a distraction this idea that they couldn't speak French was from the actual issues or the platform that any of these candidates actually bring to the table. And I think that's harmful for the NDP, and it's harmful for the race. I took a bit of time to look through some of their policies and some of the things that they're proposing. And one of the things that really strikes me is Heather McPherson's the only person that I saw that has not just a plan to talk about policies and those things more broadly, but when you're running for leadership, you also have to talk about the grassroots and the pieces of the puzzle that make up the party on the ground. And she was the only one that I saw really doing that effectively. And I think when you're at the position where the NDP is today, where they are not official party status, where they have to contend with what their identity is, but also what that looks like going forward, talking about the grassroots and talking directly to people and their role in the party is really important.
Talk to me a little bit about that, Carl, because, that is the type of thing that I think a lot of people look at, because the glory days of the NDP for a lot of people are when you were right in there with Jack Layton, Orange Wave, especially in Quebec. How important is it for this party to really go back to basics, go back to its grassroots and rebuild from there?
Well, you have to get people excited. You have to get people some hope that it can happen again, and it can happen again. But, things shift quickly in politics. We have a Liberal government now that's shifting to the right, clearly more conservative than Justin Trudeau. I think we can all agree on that. So there's an opening on the left. Now, can they seize the moment? Can they seize the day? That's up to them. Right now, though, I know that there's a lack of enthusiasm for the race. And perhaps that's why the French debate was there first, to get it out of the way. So that when we're closer to the vote, the English debate is happening, and then people have a better chance to know them. But frankly, at this point, what we have is a field of interesting candidates, but nobody's really running away with it. It's still wide open, and anything can happen.
How does the party get that enthusiasm, Mel, when you consider that there is going to be a crowded news cycle? There will be likely, I mean, this is a prime minister, this is a government that does not want to stop moving forward with any type of policy. I mean, the MOU, that is just after he came back from both Abu Dhabi and South Africa, from the UAE and South Africa at the G20. I mean, he's going at a breakneck speed. What do they need to do? Or do you think, conversely, it's a good time for people not to pay attention to the NDP because they can quietly rebuild and they don't really need all of that much enthusiasm around them? How do you feel about that?
Well, they need it for fundraising, that's for sure, so that they can help rebuild that party apparatus, even if they're doing it quietly. So I think, look, pivoting their conversation to affordability, Pierre Poilievre has been eating their lunch for months, years now, and that's part of the problem for the NDP. They need to get back to talking about issues that are important to the working class and to talking about affordability issues. And I think that the sooner that they can get a leader who is really conversant and believable in talking about those issues, relatable to the average Canadian, the better off they will be in rebuilding the rest of the party apparatus.
Okay, unfortunately, we got to leave it there, but thank you to the Friday front bench, Carl Boulanger, Melanie Paradis, and Sabrina Grover. Time for one more break on Power Play. We'll be right back after this. And that is your Power Play Week in Politics. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us. Have yourselves a great weekend, but stay tuned because your top headlines are just ahead.